The snow was relentless. It buried the mountains in white, swallowed the trees, and choked the narrow trails that once promised a path to freedom. In the heart of the Sierra Nevada, a group of weary pioneers huddled inside makeshift cabins and tents, their bodies frozen, their stomachs empty, their hope dwindling with every passing day. They had set out with dreams of a new life, rich farmland, open skies, and a future in the West. Instead, they found themselves trapped in the deadliest winter storm California had ever seen. Their wagons were stranded, their livestock dead, their food supplies gone, and soon they faced an unthinkable choice. The year was 1846. The group would become known as the Donner Party, a name etched into American history, forever associated with starvation, betrayal, and cannibalism. But this wasn't how it was supposed to be. When George Donner and James Reed led their families out of Springfield, Illinois, they were full of hope. They were just one of many wagon trains heading west along the Oregon Trail, chasing the promise of prosperity. But they were also impatient, tempted by a new route called the Hastings Cutoff, advertised as a faster path to California. They strayed from the well-traveled road. It was a decision that doomed them. The shortcut was longer, harder, and deadlier than they could have imagined. By the time they reached the Sierra Nevada, winter had arrived early, trapping them in a world of snowdrifts as high as houses. The mountains became their prison, and inside that prison, hunger became the executioner. For weeks, they tried to survive on scraps, animal hides boiled into a bitter paste, tree bark chewed until their mouths bled. Children cried themselves to sleep. Parents wasted away watching helplessly. And when death finally came to some, the others faced the horror of survival at its darkest edge, eating the flesh of the dead. By the time rescue parties arrived months later, nearly half of the Donner Party was gone. Those who lived would never escape the shadow of what they had endured. Their story became legend, whispered in disgust, studied with fascination, and remembered as one of America's darkest tragedies. But the Donner Party's nightmare is more than just a tale of cannibalism. It is a story about human desperation, about the dangers of blind ambition, and about the brutal power of nature. It is a reminder of how fragile civilization becomes when stripped of warmth, food, and hope. So what really happened in those snowbound camps? What choices were made? Who survived and who didn't? And what does this story tell us about the thin line between humanity and savagery? Tonight, we step into the snow with them. We will follow the Donner Party from their hopeful beginnings to their gruesome end. We'll see how one bad decision led to another, how survival tore families apart, and how a tragedy on the frontier became a warning etched into America's history. Welcome to the Donner Party, America's nightmare in the snow. In the mid-1800s, America was restless. The East was crowded, land was expensive, and the promise of gold and fertile soil in the West called to families like a siren song. Go west, they said, and thousands answered. Among them were George Donner, a seasoned 62-year-old farmer, and James Reed, a wealthy businessman. Together, they organized a wagon train of families bound for California. It was 1846, and their spirits were high. They packed everything they owned: furniture, farming tools, clothing, heirlooms. They brought their children, their hopes, and their dreams. For them, the trail was not just a journey, it was rebirth. The Oregon Trail was tough, but manageable. Families traveled in long wagon trains for safety, cooking together at night, singing songs to keep their spirits alive. For weeks, the Donner Party moved steadily westward. But then, at Fort Bridger, Utah, they made a fateful choice. A new guidebook by Lansford Hastings promised a faster route, the Hastings Cutoff. Instead of following the well-worn Oregon Trail north, this shortcut would shave weeks off the journey. Hastings swore it was safe. George Donner and James Reed, eager to reach California quickly, convinced the group to take it. It was a decision that sealed their fate. The Hastings cutoff turned out to be a nightmare. Instead of saving time, the route forced the party across desert wastelands and treacherous mountains. The land was unforgiving, scorching heat, no water, and rough terrain that shredded wagon wheels and broke oxen. As days turned to weeks, tempers flared. Food supplies dwindled faster than expected. Exhaustion set in, and the once united group began to fracture. James Reed, once a respected leader, was expelled after a violent confrontation where he killed another man in self. Cast out, he pushed forward alone, promising to send help back from California. George Donner, though respected, was aging and slowing. Leadership faltered, and the group drifted further into disarray. By the time they emerged from the desert, they had lost precious time and resources. The shortcut had cost them a month, and winter was coming. In late October 1846, the Donner Party reached the Sierra Nevada mountains. Snow had already begun to fall. They tried to push through, but the drifts grew higher, blocking the trails. Wagons sank, oxen collapsed, and soon the mountains were buried under blizzards. The Donner Party was trapped. They built makeshift cabins and tents at Truckee Lake, now Donner Lake, and Alder Creek, where the Donner families lagged behind. Their shelters were little more than thin walls against the brutal storms. At first, they rationed food carefully, but soon supplies ran out. They slaughtered their oxen. They boiled leather hides, chewing them into bitter paste. Children dug through snow for twigs and bark. Still, the hunger gnawed at them. Days turned into weeks. The snow kept falling. The mountains offered no mercy, and then the deaths began. As November turned to December, starvation swept through the camps. The weakest died first. Children cried for food their parents couldn't provide. Some tried to hunt, but the snow made travel nearly impossible. Others prayed, their faith shaken with each passing day. Desperation grew. A group of 15, later known as the Forlorn Hope, strapped on makeshift snowshoes and attempted to cross the mountains in search of rescue. Among them were women and children. They carried little food, and soon they began dying one by one in the snow. Those who survived faced the ultimate horror. They made the choice no human ever wants to face. They fed on the bodies of their dead companions. It was not out of cruelty, but of survival. Back at the camps, families clung to life. They chewed on bones. They prayed for rescue. And when death came inside the cabins, the line between survival and morality blurred once again. The nightmare of the Donner Party was no longer just hunger. It was humanity itself, stripped to the bone. By January, the camps had become tombs. Bodies lay frozen in the snow. Survivors whispered in the dark, weighing impossible decisions. Those who succumbed were mourned briefly, then consumed. Flesh was cut into strips, dried like jerky, divided among the starving. Some refused at first, clinging to faith and morality. But as days stretched into weeks, even they gave in. Hunger is stronger than belief. For the children, the horror was worse. Some were fed the flesh of neighbors, even relatives, without being told. When rescuers finally arrived months later, they found scenes that would haunt them forever. Families gaunt and skeletal, cabins littered with bones, bodies half-eaten, silence heavy with shame. The rescuers themselves struggled with what they saw. Some claimed survivors had killed to eat. Others swore the families only consumed those who had died naturally. The truth may never be known, but one fact remains: cannibalism saved lives. Without it, none would have lived to tell the tale. It took 4 separate rescue missions to bring the survivors out of the mountains. Each time rescuers returned, they found fewer alive and more signs of desperation. In the end, of the 87 who began the journey, only 48 survived. Nearly half were dead. The Donner name would forever be tied to the snow, the hunger, and the horror. The survivors carried scars no one could see. Some never spoke of it again. Others were haunted for life, condemned by whispers of cannibalism, even if they hadn't partaken. For America, the Donner Party became legend, a warning of ambition unchecked, of shortcuts too good to be true, and of the merciless power of nature. But beneath the horror is something more complex, a story of survival, of human will to live, even when the price is unthinkable. The Donner Party reminds us of the darkest truth. Civilization is fragile, and when stripped away, survival becomes a brutal choice. The story of the Donner Party is more than just a tale of cannibalism. It is a story of choices. Choices made in desperation, choices made in faith, choices made when there were no good answers left. 87 men, women, and children left Illinois in search of a better life. They carried hope in their wagons, dreams in their hearts, and faith in the promise of the American West. But by the time they reached the Sierra Nevada, nature had stripped them bare. 40-8 survived. 39 never saw California. What happened in those snowbound cabins has haunted America for nearly 2 centuries. The very mention of the Donner Party conjures images of hunger, horror, and humanity pushed to its breaking point. But to see the story only as cannibalism is to miss the deeper tragedy. The Donner Party reminds us how thin the line is between civilization and chaos, how fragile the human body is when stripped of warmth and food, and how, in the end, survival often comes at a price no one wants to pay. Think about it. If you had been there, with your children starving, your body wasting away, snow trapping you like a tomb, what would you have done? Would you have refused, even if it meant certain death? Or would you have crossed the line, knowing that survival demanded it? That is the horror of the Donner Party. Not that they made the choice, but that the choice was ever forced upon them. When rescuers finally brought survivors out of the mountains, the world recoiled. Newspapers printed sensational stories. Neighbors whispered. The survivors bore the shame, whether they had eaten human flesh or not. But perhaps the real shame does not belong to them. It belongs to those who sold false promises, who guided families down treacherous roads, who failed to bring help when it was most needed. The Donner Party has become legend, a symbol of tragedy in the American West. Their story is taught in classrooms, retold in books, whispered in ghost stories. The lake where they camped carries their name. But behind that legend were real people, parents who wanted better lives for their children. Children who never asked for this fate, men and women who hoped only to survive. And so the Donner Party forces us to look inward, to ask ourselves what we would do when stripped of all comfort, all civilization, all hope. It forces us to confront the darkest corners of human endurance. The truth is, the snow didn't just bury them, it buried their innocence, their dreams, and their humanity. But out of that same snow rose a story that America will never forget. So now I ask you, when you hear the name Donner Party, do you see monsters or survivors? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story made you shiver, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. Because America's past is filled with shadows, with curses, mysteries, and tragedies that still whisper from the grave, and together we'll keep digging them up. This has been the Donner Party, America's nightmare in the snow. Until next time, remember, history isn't always heroic. Sometimes it's a warning, carved into ice and bone.